The government side of the team completely misunderstand and are treating these post-conflict states as a stable and established democracy nations. But when a nation is recovering from wars, from conflict, the society are fractured, and the priority of post-conflict states are not to validate every subjective grievance, but to build a unified and a stable national identity to prevent these nations from sliding back into bloodshed. That is why we, as the opposition side of the team, completely oppose the motion today that history textbooks should focus on teaching bottom-up historiography over top-down historiography. But first, I will start with some rebuttals for the government side argument. First, they explain that textbooks are actually the most objective one and the most thorough one because they use things like peer reviews. But these things are actually, but this actually works against their case because bottom-up historiography, as they said, it relies on peer reviews. And when you use something like peer reviews, things tend to be subjective because it relies on personal traumas, it relies on localized grievance, and these things are inherently subjective. While with the top-down historiography, it relies on more documented macro history, and it is objective. They use things like constitute changes and documented systemic failures, where these things are far more objective than peer reviews. Second of all, they argue that that top-down historiography is not relatable to the public, but but when but on the post-conflict states situation, it is actually dangerous for them because on post-conflict states, from post-conflict civil war state, or these ordinary people are often the one that kills each other. And when you use bottom-up historiography to explain this, you are highlighting the intercommunal violence, and with that, there is a risk of turning people against each other because it gives risk of this group turning against the opposite one. But with the top-down historiography, it explains that citizens are universally manipulated or oppressed by the bad system or the bad leaders, and it gives them the feelings that they are in the same boat. And when they understand and when they have that feeling, it could prevent people. It actually prevent people from feeling left out or feeling targeted. And the third of all, they argue that bottom-up history actually give more better leaders and check and balance. But actually, with the top-down history, it teaches how the last built powers, how regime failed, and it explains how constitutions are written. And these are the knowledge that are needed to hold future leaders accountable and to teach the future leaders how to not repeat the same thing again. And that is the most basic things of the most basic principle of history. Now, moving on to my argument to the first one, that top-down history shift the blame to prevent retribution, and second of all, that the pragmatics of state building and institutional literacy. But first, top-down history shift the blame to prevent retribution. The immediate threat of post-conflict states is retributive violence, and it is a cycle of revenge. On a post-conflict state situation, the state must write the narrative of blame. And why does it work with the top-down historiography? Because with the bottom-up historiography, it focuses more on masses. With the top-down historiography, it shifts the narrative away and focus more on the propaganda, on the masterminds, on the constitutional failures that caused the conflict. It is turning the tragedy. It is turning the tragedy of failure of leadership or government, and it absolves the citizens' collective guilt. And that is the true social cohesion. And why does it not work with the bottom-up historiography? Because as I said earlier, bottom-up focus on masses. When when history are focused on ordinary people, it forces ethnic and social groups to point fingers at each other, and it validates their localized hatred. To my second argument, that the pragmatics of state building and institutional literacy. Thus, the post-conflict states are not only recovering but also rebuilding their constitutional, uh, but but they are rebuilding from scratch. They have new constitutional, and they have a entirely new system of government. And that is why, and this is where macro understanding are essential, because it prevents future conflict, and it explains why the old state fell, and it explains why the new one works, and how the new one works. People need to understand the macro political shift that brings them their guaranteed new rights. And with the top-down historiographic, it could be explained in a clear, systemic way how power is structured. But with the bottom-down historiography, it it involves various local groups, students, and it it involves various local groups. It involves every personal traumas. And when you teach this to students, when you teach this to schools, students will graduate with a deep sense of their own group struggles without understanding the national framework that binds the country together. You cannot build a functioning government if you do not understand how it works. So that is why with the top-down historiographic, it is more objective. And second of all, the macro level understanding of systematic failures are important. And third of all, that it shifts the blame from citizens, and it gives them an explanation to heal. And the fourth of all, it teach people the institutional literacy. That is all proud to oppose.